We want to welcome you as we wrap up Oil Camp 3 to this experience. We hope it's been a wonderful one for you as we've discussed emotions. I'm Allison, and we've got Elizabeth, wave Elizabeth, and Jan with us for this last video. And we're gonna have kind of a panel here. We love our essential oils. We use them heavily for our emotional well-being, but we also use other things, both from before we had oils in our toolbox and even now as we do have them readily available. And we want to share some of that with you so you can benefit. And we also would love to hear from you as to what you put alongside your oils that might be helpful to others that are in this camp. So my emotional journey, I mean, I'm a mom of 6. I've been married for 20 years, just relationships, life, myself. You know, I'm a woman. I've got my hormones. You know, I've got the basic stuff that emotions bring into life, but I also have a grief journey that's been my most acute emotional challenges, if you would say. Our daughter, who was almost 10, died 8 years ago. And I didn't have oils then, but I sure wish I did. At the same time, that really drove me to look into other ways to help manage my emotions through that grief process. So I want Elizabeth, I guess, next, just to share a little bit of her emotional journey so you can have a foundation of where she's coming from, and then we'll circle back and share some of our modalities.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth, and some of y'all may have heard my story before, but I got started with essential oils because of emotional health. I have a lot of physical ailments, but I really didn't believe that oils could do anything for physical stuff, and so it was my emotions that finally pushed me to try doTERRA. I have battled anxiety all my life and seems to have gotten worse as I have gotten older, and so I reached the point where I was really in kind of a desperate situation. I started having panic attacks and just a lot of emotional stuff going on that I couldn't really deal with. And like Allison, I did not want to have to rely on something that was I couldn't get off of. And so I ended up looking into oils, and Balance and Serenity were the two oils that really helped to calm me and helped to stop my panic attacks. And so when I saw how great they worked for my anxiety and calming my emotions down, that's what finally got me to jump on board with doTERRA for my whole life, to get everything in my life cleaned up, my respiratory system, everything. So they have made such a big difference in my anxiety and how I'm able to cope with being overwhelmed. And I just love them. So.
Thank you. All right, so Jan is my cousin, and I've loved spending more time with her as she's been drawn to the oils for her life support in a lot of ways. And so, Jan, will you share kind of your emotional journey and where you're coming from?
Sure. I have the opposite story than Elizabeth. I kind of got into oils for a physical challenge. Something simple as restless legs, but if you've ever had it, you know that it's just frustrating and aggravating. But I have had emotional challenges that I've struggled with most of my life, and in the form of depression. And I've, over the course of the years, looked for ways to manage it in healthy ways. I spent a good part of my life managing it through working to the point of doing nothing else and not necessarily establishing healthy relationships in my life, just because working was a way of dealing with the depression. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about the other modalities I used before getting introduced to essential oils, because they were helpful. And then adding the oils to it has just made a tremendous difference. It never occurred to me that the oils could help me manage this situation or this condition that I have had, and frankly, I expect to always have a challenge with. But it's wonderful to have different tools in the toolbox to be able to draw on.
And I would thank you both. I would say you've also, it kind of plays into the emotional, the focusing challenges. Right?
Yeah.
The ADD aspect of your emotional health has also been a big part.
Right. Yeah, I didn't mention that, but part of my depression, I know, is a natural part of the whole ADD condition that I've been diagnosed with and been working to manage most of my life. And as Allison mentioned, focus is a huge issue for me.
And just because everyone's going to ask in the comments, what did you use for your restless legs?
Oh, Wild Orange. But I didn't start out with Wild Orange. I started out with a whole 3 or 4, and I was on the Allison's Facebook group, and somebody asked, and I noticed somebody said, oh, Wild Orange works for me. And I'm like, terrific, just one oil. And I went to it, and it works for me, and it works for my dad and my mom now. So
That's awesome.
I'm a big Wild Orange fan.
And that's one of those things that every time she says it, it surprises me because I forget that Wild Orange can do that. It just makes me happy. But you know that all the oils impact us both physically and emotionally, and I love learning from each other. All right, so Elizabeth kind of referred to, you are welcome to use all kinds of things in this group. We're not judging you on your path with that. But I personally was not open to medication after my daughter died. And that was just me and where I was. And part of it was just because I was so frugal and I didn't want something that I couldn't come off of. And what I kept being told was once you started, you couldn't stop. I also really valued leaning into the emotional situation I was going through because I still had 5 kids at home. I guess 4 at the time, but going to be 5. And I needed to be present for them. I didn't want to numb. And so that was just my mindset when I went in. So I joined the gym for the first time ever after Lydia died. And Jana and I were talking about the differences in how we've approached exercise. That was partly just because they had childcare. And so I was a kid that I could deal with myself and even put my current thoughts aside without the constant distraction of having to care for others. Because distraction is one way, I think it's an unhealthy way a lot of times that people deal with their emotional challenges. Because it may help you get through the day, and there's a time and place, but it doesn't help you process. I went to Rachel Hollis's movie, I guess it was just this week, and she talked about a lot of the crappy things in our life are because of what we haven't dealt with. They were just trying to shove aside rather than process it. So another thing so with that, I liked the group classes. That's just what motivated me. So if I was doing a step class, I couldn't think about anything else or I'd be falling. And so that was a good chance to get those endorphins up in a healthy way that I knew was good for my body. I still weighed more during that season than ever. And I wasn't even an emotional eater, but that cortisol will do it to you. But I knew that the endorphins and the good hormones that were being produced from that exercise, they sustained me. It didn't make life easy, but it did give me a way to cope that I know made it better than it would have been. So exercise is one. As I said, leaning in is a big deal for me. And so I was reading a lot. For me, it's spiritually, I needed a framework, theology of pain, books to put some perspective because we're not victims just of our circumstances. It's our perspective that's the biggest thing. And so if you can challenge that perspective with truth, then even if your circumstances don't change, your approach to life and your joy in that situation can. And so that was huge. And even now, when I have those grief holidays come up this year, I was like, I've tried different things. And I think I finally landed on for now. I'm planning a couple nights for me to get away so I could lean into those books. So I could just lean into my sadness even, look through the old pictures and things and feel the emotions, kind of exhale, and then I was able to come back up and be present for my family rather than trying to shove it down for weeks at a time leading up and after and never actually getting it out and being a real grump to everyone around me. Listen to your body, listen to your emotions, and God created us to respond. It's telling us something. And our mainstream approach in general to health is let's squash those symptoms. And when you can actually lean into and process and resolve what's going on, or at least get yourself in a healthier place, you're going to be in a better foundation for all of life. Financial decisions, your food decisions, just you name it. Our emotional health impacts everything. So, okay, Epsom salt baths are huge. We all need our magnesium. It calms everything. Put the oils of choice in those salts and melt for a little bit. I even do it for my children. They don't know a bath at this point without salts in it. And I get to impact how they're going to respond to me later by what I put in that bath. I don't know if I had anything else on my list. I'm sure I do. But that's what's coming to mind right now. If something else comes up, we can wrap that up. But Elizabeth, do you want to go from there and just share some of the things, other modalities you've used?
Okay. So one thing that, like I said, anxiety is something I've struggled with all my life. And kind of like Jan, I feel like I probably always will have a bent towards that. It's just learning how to cope with it. So, in my younger years, I always just thought this was something I was going to have to deal with, and I just had to figure out how to live with it. But as I have gotten older and found other options that can help me cope with it, I have gotten a better handle on it. So that's one thing you really have to remember, is just because you have anxiety or depression or something like that, it doesn't mean you always have to feel that way. There are things that you can do to help you learn to get through these things, or some practices that you can do that will kind of help you cope with them. So one of those, hold on, let me grab my note. Sorry. One of those things for me is gratitude journaling. And I am prone to be one who always looks at the glass half empty instead of half full. And so that's something that I have had to really be intentional with, is to think about positive things in the situation instead of negative. So one thing that Amanda Duke, she's been on this week talking about some emotional stuff too, is that she has really pushed me. That's something I always knew I needed to do, but you just kind of be like, oh, I don't have time to sit down and think about that right now. I've got a lot of stuff going on. But if you start your day or even end your night on a positive note, writing down 5 or 10 things that you're thankful for, and it really pushes you to look outside of just the big things, like I'm thankful I have a house, I'm thankful I have a husband or children or whatever. You start having to dig, because you can't say those same 5 things every day. And so you have to think of things like, I'm thankful I had enough that you have to get creative. And so that's been really good for me, to force my mind to start thinking of the positive instead of the negative. Another thing is prayer. And I'm very religious, so I'm going to put a lot of religion in this, but prayer is something that is very important. For one thing, if you're praising God for something, you can't worry at the same time. And that is something that I struggle with, is worrying a lot. So when I'm praising God for stuff, I can't have those 2 things in my mind at the same time. So when I feel that starting to well up of panicking about a situation, or my mind is going down a rabbit trail of what bad may happen, is to start thanking God for things in the situation, or just random other things in my life, to take my mind off of it. And then another one is to pray for other people, because when we're in a situation where we feel like this is the end of the world, there's always somebody else who has something else going on in their life too. It may not be as bad as your situation, it may be worse than your situation, but if you stop and pray for them, it helps you to kind of refocus and not be so self-absorbed in your situation. So that has really helped me. And then another thing, we just did a Louis Giglio study at our church that was about facing your giants. And one of the giants that he mentioned was fear. And he talked about how our society has so much anxiety, but we don't dig to the root of what anxiety is. And anxiety is really a fear. And so when you're starting to have these anxious feelings, to think about, what is it that I'm afraid of, and is it rational? And I will say 11 times out of 10, my fear is not rational. So for me to even just start to go down that rabbit trail, let myself, but think it out. Like, what is the worst case scenario that could happen here? Most of the time, this is something really ridiculous. Like, there's no way that my worst case is ever going to play out how I think it could. And so for me to let that kind of play out and see, this is not rational. This is not something that's actually going to happen. And all of these pieces are going to fall in place, and it's going to be okay. So think about that. What is it that you're afraid of? And is your fear rational? And then the last one is, I get really overwhelmed sometimes in my life because I say yes to everything. And that's something that I have also struggled with all my life. My mom is the same way, and her mother was the same way. So it's a generational curse and blessing, because I love to help people, and my mom is like that too. If anybody who knows her always knows she's helping everybody all the time, even though her plate is full. And so that has become a problem for me, that I don't say no to people. And my husband is a great balancer for me in that. But I still have to draw boundaries and see, is this something I need to let into my life? Maybe this is something that I'm supposed to be doing right now, but maybe it's not. And when I'm feeling very stressed and overwhelmed and anxious, sometimes it's because I have done that to myself and I need to take something off of my plate. So an important thing to that is knowing yourself, knowing what your gifts are and your strengths, and making sure that the things that you're saying yes in your life to align with all of those things, and that they're things that you're really supposed to be doing. Maybe God did ask you to step out of your comfort zone and do something that you're not particularly skilled in, you feel like, and so that does stress you. But if he didn't ask you, then you don't need to be doing it. So that has been a big thing for me, is to realize what's supposed to be on my plate and what I need to be letting go of. And it's okay to say no, because that may be something somebody else needs. Some things that I have used, Allison, do you want me to go ahead and talk about that? Products that I've used?
Sure, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So when I very first started, I told you Balance and Serenity were my two that were like instant relief for me to calm down and get my emotions under control. But since then, I have found several other ones that I also really love. Peace is one of those. The first time I opened it up, I texted Allison. I was like, oh my gosh, the smell, I don't know. But I have found there are quite a few oils that the first time you smell them, you're kind of like, oh, I don't know about the smell, but you begin to get drawn to them. And Peace is one of those for me. The smell had to grow on me, but I love it now. It's one of my favorites. And so when I'm feeling, it actually stays in my purse all the time. I have one by my bed, one in my purse. And I roll it over my heart when I'm feeling stressed out. I can put some on my wrist. I put it on the bottom of my feet before I go to sleep. And that helps my mind chatter to kind of quiet so that I can relax. Another one is Elevation. That has been my jam lately. And that was another one. When I first opened it up and smelled it, I'm not super big on floral oils, so that one didn't appeal to me quite as much, but I love it now. And I have also found that I really like it mixed with Balance. So that is my oil that I put on when I do my gratitude journaling. So I mix those two together, smell them for a minute, put them on over my chest so that I can breathe that, and then I do my gratitude journal, and that helps me to really focus on what I'm thankful for, and it can help uplift your mood. And then
I'll pause you on that. I think that's important too. When we're doing activities to help focus, calm, take control, when we can attach a particular oil and keep using that oil with it, as you smell it throughout the day or other times, it's going to take you back to that place of focus. And making those associations is powerful.
yes. Thing are my vitamins, LLV, and PB Assist. Your vitamins has a lot of omega oils in it, and those, if you start researching that, have a powerful effect on your emotions. And then also PB Assist. Your gut and brain are so closely connected. So I've been working through some issues this week in my own life that have caused a lot of upset stomach. And so you have probably experienced that before. If you had to go speak in front of someone, or you had something that was kind of stressful in your life, your stomach reacts to that. And so there's a big link there between your brain and gut health. So if you're taking your PB Assist, that is also going to help to balance out your emotions and help calm you down. So those are some of my favorite go-tos for anxiety and emotional health.
Awesome. I think that's going to relate to a lot of people, and they can pull things out of there. It'll be helpful. Thank you.
I really had no idea how many people in America struggled with anxiety, and that was something I kind of, when I had problems with it, I didn't want to tell anybody, because I thought they'll think I don't have my life together, and I'm trying to act like I have my life together, and I don't want them to know. But when I started teaching people about essential oils, I in 3 years, I don't know that I've been to a class where somebody hasn't raised their hand and said, I'm really struggling with anxiety or depression, or I'm on this kind of medication for emotions. So that was very eye-opening to me that this is something that everybody struggles with. And just seeing that we have how many campers in this camp, huge. People want ways to cope with their emotions besides popping pills to disguise it.
I think it's an epidemic, meaning it's starting younger and younger because we don't have the tools to manage in another way. There's a time and place when we need the meds, but not every first person who starts with anxiousness. There are other things that we can start with, and I think this is filling a very, very needed gap. I remember talking to a chiropractor at a Dine and Above breakfast one time recently, not too long ago, and they said that they have more patients coming in for anxiety than anything, spine, back, whatever related. That is the core of their business, trying to help people work through. I know you use a chiropractor a lot. You have as your lifetime. Has that been more for physical? Have you ever really approached it from an emotional standpoint?
I have not. No, mine's pretty much all been for physical, but that's very interesting.
I would be interested if others have used it to that way. I know that there are things that we as a three haven't used that there is benefit to. That's one of the ones that I think is cool that I haven't learned as much about. But since it impacts every system in your body, that's also going to impact your emotional health. I just don't quite know how that adds up. All right, so Jan, tell us about your modalities that you'd like to put alongside.
Okay. So first of all, as I'm listening to Elizabeth, it amazes me how so similar we can be in so many ways, and yet how different we can be in terms of the challenges that we follow. I too have a mother who is just got the biggest heart for service, and so I learned a lot about that from her, but at the same time, and then I also aspire because I feel like I fall short of, the examples she sets, but that can cause conflict too, because saying no is a hard thing, because she does it so graciously and effortlessly and seemingly without a lot of, toll on her system. But it's amazing as I've gotten older and we've grown closer, I realized, wow, it really does have a toll on her too. And so, we together have learned how to set boundaries so that we're serving in a healthy way and not one that robs us of our own health and joy. So that's a little bit of a side note there. Also interesting how different modalities work for us. So I used to try the prayer, the gratitude journal, and also prayer. And what I found myself in, it immediately sent me into a loop of guilt because, I could find lots to be grateful for. And then I would beat myself up. Well, what have you got to be depressed about? Because look at all this stuff. And I knew it, and I couldn't argue with my list. I was, amazingly blessed. And prayer was the same thing. I kept being thankful. And then at some point it would lead to, okay, but God, why am I still depressed? So I find it really fascinating how, a lot of these modalities we try, but we're different, and we've got to get to the one that really serves us. And so the one that I stumbled across, and it totally was stumbling across it, I was diagnosed with depression at an early age, and I did the traditional medication route and therapy route. And to a certain degree, I still rely on those. And those were helpful because my go-to for managing my depression was to isolate and or totally submerge myself in something that I thought was worthy. And usually work was always a good, who can criticize me for working, right? And so I could work better than anybody. I could throw myself into it. But it was also a way of isolating and also numbing myself to what I was really feeling. Because if you stay busy enough, it's hard to think about, what's really going on in your head. So, again, did the antidepressants and did the therapy. Therapy was good in that I worked with a group, and it allowed me to get out of my isolation, forced me to bring conversations to the table that I otherwise would not have brought to the table. So that's been helpful along my journey. The one I stumbled into was exercise. I was dating a triathlete at the time, and I would go to his matches, and I was sitting there and thinking, oh my goodness, they're getting ready to swim 1.5 miles and run for 13 miles and bike for 100. It was like, you could do something. I was, when I started, I was 39, never been an exerciser in my life, and loved sports, but never felt very coordinated or very good at it. So one day on the beach, I watched this woman come up, and they write their numbers on the bottom of their calves when they race, and she was like 56, and I'm thinking, but she's 56 and she's getting ready to undertake this. I can run 3 miles. And then that's when I got started, and it really made a huge change for me, because what I've come to learn is that my depression is very much a product of how my body produces dopamine and how I get the endorphins that I need. And so when I started running, I was able to let go of all of the chatter in my head, and really I had to concentrate on not passing out and doubling over. And that helped. And then also it really did increase the dopamine in my body and the endorphins, and it really took me to a level. And it was very it was not a conscious thing. I wasn't thinking about, oh, I'm going to feel better, or it just happened. And so it definitely was a clinical thing for me. And so I then became more and more involved in running, and what I found is it really made a big difference if I would start my day that way. And about 3 years into it, I was training for my second marathon, and I broke my foot, and was forced to not run for 16 weeks. And it really made a big difference, not only for that 16 weeks, but then I had to get my brain working again toward, I need to exercise for my health. And so that's one thing that I struggle with on and off. I know I need to do it, but so when I have to tell myself and talk myself into feeling better, a lot of it is not just feel better or be more grateful or pray more. It's get your body up moving, because that's what your body needs to do. And don't think about why you're doing it or what effect it has. Just do it. I was telling Allison the other day, I did hot yoga for a while, and I have no idea why, but every time I came out of there, I went to the car and I cried for 20 minutes, and just uncontrollably. And I still to this day don't know why it invoked that, because when I'm in yoga, all I'm doing is concentrating about the moves, because I'm not coordinated and I really have to think about what I'm doing. But and again, I can't explain why my body reacted that way, but something about, maybe it was letting go of the worry, maybe it was just concentrating, maybe it was the heat. I don't know what it was, the movement, but for whatever reason, it allowed me some emotional release. So I guess if I've learned anything, and again, this kind of is helpful with the oils, because I can't explain all the time why a certain oil makes me feel better, but if once I know it does, I don't need to understand it to know that that's what I need to go to, and that's what I need to do. So it's kind of a theme in my life. I don't understand why these things affect me the way they do emotionally, but I know they do. So just do it, and trust that they'll provide some relief. The other thing I'll mention just briefly, because you mentioned it, Allison, is, I do know that a lot of my depression it's a common symptom or condition that goes along with ADD. I was one that learned late in life that I had ADD. Like a lot of people, particularly women, we learn to cope with it at such a young age, maybe because we have this need to please or whatever, but we learn to cope with it so that oftentimes we don't know ourselves that we have it. And I know my mother's a first grade teacher, and she still is amazed that to this day I've ever been diagnosed with it, because she saw the symptoms all those years of children that she worked with, and she just never saw those symptoms in me. So it was like, this doesn't make sense. But that just goes to show there's a lot that goes on in our brain that doesn't manifest itself in our behavior. So again, it's not always, if you're trying to understand it, that may be getting in your way to just getting past it. So ADD, focus is the hard thing for me. I'm a consummate procrastinator. I get my burst of creativity and genius waiting to the last minute, which kind of brings another element of stress. But what I have found with the oils is that Intune really went a long way to help me to focus. The first time I used it, I had a 2-week list of to-dos that nothing had been accomplished. And I couldn't tell you why, because I was working it every day. And I put that Intune on my toes, and literally 2 hours later, I had half the list done. So I can't explain that, but my body needed what Intune gave me, and it allowed my mind to focus. So I guess my message is, if you're trying to understand the cause and the effect of whatever modality you're using or whatever oil you're using, sometimes you don't need to figure it out. Just do it. Just do it and trust that it's going to have the effect that your body has told you it will have, just based on using it.
And if you love to learn, keep learning, but do it anyway. In the meantime.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because there are reasons out there, but we don't know them all.
Yeah. It's interesting to explore, but sometimes you just have to do it because you know it's the right thing to do.
I mean, we had just moved to have PE as a requirement for one of my children, even when it wasn't a state requirement, to continue on for her focusing for her ADD needs. And then I saw people come up talking about how it gets more oxygen to your brain. Think of how tired you are after a long trip driving. I mean, it's not really taxing, but you aren't moving, so you're not getting enough oxygen to your brain, and that impacts so much. And so that's another just basic way that it probably made sense. But you're right, that movement is huge to break up her day and help her to be able to do those last subjects in the way that she should. Something y'all said reminded me of, we carry tension a lot of times with our emotions, wherever that is for you. I do love going back to that book that I mentioned. Well, I mentioned several books in one of the earlier videos where you can figure out the correlation between that area of your body where you carry your tension and maybe what that emotional root is. So you can be more targeted with it. But I have gotten to the point where I do regular massages, and I'll bring in the oils that relate to what I'm needing to process. And that has been wonderful. That used to just sound like a fluff, eating bonbons type thing to me. But there is so much physical benefit to that touch and having someone that you can have a connection with, that you build a relationship with. I loved it. I had brought in Elevation and Forgive this time for my massage, and my sweet massage therapist said, I just couldn't help but pray for you when I got those two on you. It just evoked such a spiritual kind of shift in her. And I'm like, you pray, you pray. I'll take the prayer along with the massage. But it's neat just to have kind of those unexpected responses that we get. So the massage, I've not done the hot yoga, and it hasn't been as much of an emotional connection for me. And maybe it's because I needed to put my piece or my Intune on before I went in. But still, stretching out, and finding those areas where you have just clenched up and you're holding that tension has been huge. That's helpful. And then as far as the journaling, we also talked about, and if you're struggling with focus, journaling may not be it for you. But I love words. I love crafting words. I love being able to finally capture what I'm feeling and get it out of me. And it's like I can move on. And so I do love journaling. But as someone said recently, that I thought it was perfect. She says, if you're just constantly worried about who's going to read this later, it's probably not going to be that therapeutic. If you can streak through the pages just between you and God and get it out there, play with it, see what works. I think we touched on a lot of really great options. A lot of it's common sense, but give yourself permission to prioritize these things, because it does matter. How you treat everyone else around you is going to be impacted by how you're treating yourself. It's not just a selfish thing. It's putting that oxygen mask on so you can go take care of others, because we can have positive and negative impacts around us one way or the other, and these choices will play into that. I know after our acute grief season, we cut back on so many things that are just commonplace in our culture. We just don't do many sports and things. And if that's your family's awesome way to get out into the world, do it. but it's okay to say no and to choose a lifestyle that fits what's going to be healthy for your family. Don't get into the pressure of those expectations, but make conscious choices towards an intentional a goal for where you're trying, what you're trying to achieve. And if it doesn't support that, don't do it. Find another way to work through that. Seems like I had one more thought. I don't know what it was though. Oh, some other things that I was reading about as I was preparing for this were, for instance, acupuncture. I have not done acupuncture for emotional health. I would love to hear if that's something that you do, those that are listening. Tapping is something else that I'm familiar with, but I haven't done much of it. And it's as you're saying things, touching different meridian points that just, I don't understand how it works, but I've heard of great responses to it. And I mean, seriously, what are you hurting? Nothing. You can find YouTube videos on tapping. We did include affirmations and positive statements to go along with each of the oils in this camp. If that's something new to you, just play with it. We've done some of that with our business trainings, and I had to learn. What you put in. This is taking your thoughts captive. Is all this is. This is choosing what you're feeding your mind, because your subconscious is working towards a goal, and it's usually kind of negative. We're usually pretty down on ourselves and what we see in the world. It's not just Elizabeth glass half full challenges there. We all struggle with our self-talk. So use these statements or make them your own, but still be conscious of what you're telling yourself and attach positive things. Again, use your frame, scriptural things, whatever it is that you can use to associate with the different oils, especially these emotional ones, so you can reinforce and grow in maturity with your tools for managing those emotions. I think we have a tremendous toolbox we've added to it this week, and I know we'll keep learning. So I look forward to learning from the comments as we have all of our different campers coming from different walks of life. And I want to thank y'all for giving us your time. And I hope that you've learned things that are going to have a positive impact on your emotional health. So thank you for being a part of this, and thank you, Elizabeth and Jan. And we will see you back in Essentially Teamwork.